We are joined by the Dutch Finance Minister Sigrid Kaag. Thank you so much. I know you have been hectic for you past 48 hours. So first of all, we appreciate your time on Bloomberg TV. And then, well, the IMF is coming to an end. To me, there's two big takeaways. One is the global outlook. They point to downside risks. And then there's potential tensions over trade because the geopolitics are coming to the front for it. Do you feel perhaps a little bit gloomy yourself? Or actually, is this a way to focus everyone's priorities?
I think it's the latter. It's a way to focus. It's always, of course, important to have the IMF's outlook. That sort of should sharpen our minds. And then the debates helps you see, again, the different perspectives, because it depends very much if you speak from a European perspective or whether you're in a country which is highly indebted in the global south. And these things matter. There are big differences. But I think I'm not more optimistic or pessimistic. I'm more alert. Given the fact there's so many variables and so much uncertainty, we need to sharpen our minds. We need to ensure that the policy instruments we have are properly used and applied. And we need to ensure that we collaborate and we strengthen our global partnership.
And here you've brought up all of the questions that I wanted to ask in one single answer. And I think you pinpointed to three things that are very key. First, there's big divergence going on in the world. But specifically, when you look at Europe and we look at the euro area, obviously we're dealing with very different economies. How do you see the outlook overall? There was this idea the year started very well for Europe. The winter from hell did not manifest. And we saw the turbulence in the banking picture overall. Not European banks specifically, but a lot of that fit into the European narrative. How do you see the outlook overall for Europe?
Well, I think here also there's a challenge now, and it's for all of us as European finance ministers to see if we can make progress on the banking union, capital markets union. A lot of these dossiers have been kept sort of not in the abyss, but rather we were unable to reach the next steps and consensus on that front. Secondly, I think it's also upon us to really start the discussions and the negotiations when the Commission puts forward the proposal on the reform and the modernization of the Stability and Growth Pact, because fiscal rules need to be fit for the challenges that we face. And I think not doing so actually undercuts the unity of purpose that we need to demonstrate as a European Union, also at a political level.
And all of this together, of course, you're hoping that perhaps infuses momentum into this. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's a perspective that I take from you, that hopefully this gets everyone focused to deal with issues that we know have been pending for years, some of them. Do you believe specifically, though, when it comes to the fiscal framework, because we know we always get heated between the different countries, when do we get a proposal, a consensus for fiscal rules that are fitted for a modern European economy? Some say at this point they're in need of change, but how much change?
Yeah, let me take one step back. I'm not only hopeful, I think it's incumbent upon all of us as finance ministers that are central to all of government's decisions that we seize the opportunity in a potential difficult situation to really focus and to also sharpen the instruments that we have and render them fit for purpose. So it's not hope, I think it's duty. Secondly, I think the Commission is intending, and I sincerely hope that they will, towards the end of this month, to submit a first proposal on the new Stability and Growth Pact, and I think we need to start the conversation. We know that there are different views. There are different opinions on elements of what could be debt reduction, the national pathways, the metrics, the safeguards, the oversight. But we need to negotiate. I mean, the fallback is always the old SGP. To my mind, I don't think that's a good solution because it hasn't worked, and we've seen great divergences in actually debt accrual by countries and very little movement in terms of the reduction. So let's really fix this and let's start the negotiation.
And obviously for an international audience, that means rules that some have criticized for years or perhaps focus too much, as you say, on debt reduction, but have not perhaps modernized themselves or even focus on growth, and that needs to be as equally important. And in this equation, you also have inflation. How much do you worry about inflation in Europe? We've seen the European Central Bank go very hard on this, the fastest increase in rates on record, but inflation is still a problem, especially core inflation. Is that something that keeps you up at night, perhaps?
No, I don't stay up at night. I think you need to sleep as well to have a sound mind and a sort of acute reaction to the problems. But more importantly, core inflation is here to stay for quite some time, at least till 2025, we understand. So it's important that the ECB and all other central banks sort of maintain both their perspective on price stability as well as us governments on what should be elements of financial stability. Those two need to go hand in hand. I don't think there's an easy trade-off. Ultimately, core inflation will affect citizens, and all of us again need to determine which levels of support need to be provided, but that they are timely and that they are targeted and temporary. And that's really a critical question also for us in the Netherlands. We've produced a very generous support package last year, covering this year, but we cannot sustain it, nor should we want to. We need to focus on the most vulnerable, and we need to exit from the broad range of support measures that we had adopted, because the situation is different. And the President of the Dutch National Bank really refers, and I agree fully with him, to the risk of a compensation society. So we need to also keep our eye on the ball in that regard.
And that was a message also from the IMF. The fiscal now cannot impede the monetary
Correct.
policy and clash in that way. I wonder, and I know when you're European and you're a politician, you do not talk about the European Central Bank. There's a big separation between the two
Correct.
of them. But I do want to ask you, do you have faith that Madame Lagarde will get the right path to bring down inflation? When you look at the European Central Bank, do you go, yes, we have faith, they will get to the right consensus?
Absolutely.
And that's all I know you're going to say, so perhaps
I admire and respect Madame Lagarde greatly. I admire the board, and I think they will do what's right. They face very difficult moments of decision.
Absolutely.
And I think ourselves as Ministers of Finance also need to do what is incumbent upon us. We cannot expect the ECB to solve matters that finance ministers ought to address, but the ECB and its independence needs to be safeguarded, because otherwise I think we risk politicizing what should be very sound decisions. It's been established with an independent mandate, and I will always continue to stand for that independence.
And we're running out of time, but I have two final questions for you. There has been a lot of talk about China and trade. When you look at China, is it a partner, a rival? Is it a country that fundamentally does not share the values that are key to Europeans, so therefore you have to de-risk the most that you can? It's a very tricky question, but how do you see the Chinese playing into this?
I think from a European Union perspective, we've always established that can be a partner, can be a system rival, and we can sort of selectively collaborate. It's always one of the three. What we want to make sure is, of course, we safeguard our own interest, and it's neither de-risking for us, I think it is actually re-globalizing, but making sure that we keep our eye on the ball of our strategic assets, that we do the right investment screening, and of course that we harness our own potential. And I think a strong Europe as a strong ally alongside the US is really something we need to make sure we invest in and we provide for.
And just very briefly, are you disappointed there was no joint statement again because of Russia?
Well, I wasn't expecting it, but it's always disappointing. But I think more importantly, we need to ensure that the international community, the strong voices, remain united, and that we do whatever it takes to ensure that Ukraine gets its territorial independence and integrity back, and that this war ends as soon as possible. But it's upon the Russians to achieve that, and we need to stand by Ukraine for whatever it takes.